Hey, it's good to be with you today. Before we dive in, want to give you a heads up on something we're doing next week. Next week is a baptism Sunday, so as part of our service, we'll be doing baptisms. One of the things we see in the New Testament is when people say yes to Jesus, that is a next step that, among many, that is taken. And so a lot more to be said there. Maybe you've got some questions about that, but we just want to let you know that if that is piquing any percentage of interest for you, a great next step will be to do what was just suggested, which is to go to that Connect page, let us know that you have some questions that you'd like to talk, and then there's an opportunity available to you next week as we celebrate baptisms. That's really a cool thing. So that we want to let you know of. Okay, so with that, I want to dive into to this idea that we want to propose today, which is to say this, that, that Baltimore or the Baltimore Metro may be home, or wherever you're watching from or visiting from today may be home, but you often long to be a citizen in the land of Ur. And the land of Ur, in terms of, if you were richer, if you were stronger, if you were smarter, if you were more successful for your age or your time, then you would go, man, I will have made it. And so that land of Ur becomes this mirage sort of waiting for you. It's where refreshment, it's where life is going to be found. And the national anthem, of course, how could it not be anything but ski-lows, I wish. I wish I was a little bit taller. I wish I was a baller. That it is the soundtrack of the land of Ur. And you enjoy that deep dive today as that kind of makes its way back to your playlists. But so what we begin to think, though, is that if we just have the Ur, we're going to be okay. And then we do this really strange thing, even sometimes where it's not even us, but if someone else could just get to the land of Ur, if someone else was better at their job, then your job would be better. If they were kinder to you, then your marriage would be maybe not as contentious as it is. If they are better behaved, then maybe parenting wouldn't feel like such a just a constant merry-go-round of nonsense, And we can even begin to think, boy, if someone else just got to that then I would be okay too. And so to live in either of those spaces, to long for citizenship in the land of Ur, to quote our friend Admiral Akbar on the May the 4th weekend, it's a trap. It's a trap. It's one of those places where we say, hey, it's 30 miles to the land of Ur, but we just keep seeing that same 30-mile away sign. We just never actually get there because there's just never actually a point where we ever arrive in the land. Rockefeller, I think it was once asked, how much money is having enough money when you are one of the richest people in, human history in the Gilded Age? And his answer, summarized, I think, where a lot of us are with whatever our Ur is, his answer was just $1 more. One more dollar would be enough, and then when I get that dollar, it'll be another dollar. And so what we may or may not know from life having happened to us is that this is a trap. I mean, this is, it is a slow and slippery poison in some of the relationships we say matter most. In our relationship with God, in our relationship with ourselves, the way comparison runs to make us always feel lesser than, or the way in which we might use people to feel better or worse based on whatever arbitrary standards we're living for. That's a thing that I think I could already see some head nods going, yeah, this is a thing in my life. This is a thing I've experienced. This is one of the ways in which sabotage, intentional or unintentional harm done to our relationships by us happens. And so what we want to do today is not solve that for you. We won't be able to do that necessarily, but what we want to be able to do is move it into the light. To move it into the light, to talk about maybe the power that comparison has on the relationships around you, and begin to wonder aloud, if we move this into the light, how can we, rather than leverage one another, actually help one another experience God's flourishing in our relationships rather than the leveraging that's being created? Right? So we're going to look at Saul. today as a case study in this conversation. Saul is the first king of Israel. He's initially, he looks the part of the king. He's got some wits about him. He's got some prowess. And in the early days of his career as the king, he's humble. He's a pretty humble guy. And so when Samuel lets him know he's going to be king, the early days, there is military victory, there is humility, there is carrying the way of God in his story, and the borders are secure, and flourishing is happening in the land. Everything's going quite well. But then, like many of us in this room, he becomes a bit of a victim of his own success. And anything that was once informed by what does God have for me, what does Samuel think I should be doing, becomes an exercise and, well, I'm just going to do whatever I want. And so things begin to go less well, to the point where Samuel lets him know, in a very similar theme to Moses, when we looked about that a few weeks ago before Easter, that he's not going to continue on as king, that he's going to be replaced. And this begins a pathway into not receiving it as a grace, not receiving it as good. There's a lot of pressure behind this job. I don't want to do it forever. But then as Saul's attempt to kind of cling to his way and cling to his power all the way to the very end. This will reach a point of crescendo in the interaction with David and Goliath. Okay, so you have this existential threat now in Goliath, who, this might be a familiar part of the story for you. It represents the Philistines. Now there's insecurity in the land again. And he's not going to go up against King Saul. He's going to go up against someone that is appointed and endorsed and helped by Saul, this young, shepherd who's on the outskirts. Even his own family isn't really sure he's the guy that should do it. This young man named David. Well, as you might be familiar with the pop culture analogy or the literary reference, if nothing else, David is successful in this battle against this behemoth of a man, Goliath. He wins the battle. Respectability is restored. All of this has happened, by the way, under Saul's watch, with Saul's endorsement and help. And so one might think this could be the turning over of a new leaf. Hey, there's a new moment, there's restoration of security, there's the way of God prevailing, maybe I can finish well and hand off, but what we're going to see in 1 Samuel 18 is that's not how it's going to go. What we're going to see instead is how David's success, even under his leadership, Saul's leadership, just destroys him. And what comparison does in his life and story. And then next week, we're going to look at it through the lens of David as far as how to deal with that in your life when there's unhealthy conflict swirling about and living in you and around you. So we'll deal with that part next week. So we're going to look purely at David, not at David's response this week, but King Saul. So 1 Samuel chapter 18, we're going to work through the passage, and I'm just going to read through the passage and make some observations, because I probably don't have to tell you today that comparison has the capacity to make you just feel completely deflated. That if you live in the land of Ur today, we should be here by here, and here by here, and here by here. You would have a way to take any good vibes you brought into this room and completely just feel like someone's got to scrape you off the floor to get you out of here. What we want to talk about instead is to what degree does living in that place and letting that stuff eat us alive, what is it actually doing to us? What is it actually sabotaging, and what might we do to move that into the light? So 1 Samuel chapter 18, beginning in verse 5, says this: Whatever mission Saul sent him on, David was so successful that Saul gave him a high rank in the army. This pleased all the troops and Saul's officers as well. So on paper, things look good. Good stuff's happening. Goliath is defeated. We should all be happy. There's celebration in the land. Verse 6, when the men were returning home After David had killed the Philistine, the women came out from all the towns of Israel to meet King Saul with singing and dancing, with joyful songs and with timbrels and lyres. And as they danced, they sang, "Saul has slain his thousands, and David his tens of thousands." Saul was very angry. This refrain displeased him greatly. "They have credited David with tens of thousands," he thought, "but me with only thousands. What more can he get but the kingdom?" And from that time on, Saul kept a close eye on David. So remember, the vibe here is celebratory. We won. We're victorious. We're secure. You've done the thing that you're supposed to do. Everyone's feasting. Everyone's celebrating. There's good things in the punch bowl. And people are singing songs. But Saul gets really fixated on the songs. Why? Because they're presenting inaccurate information. He feels the need to correct the song, like, wait a second, he hasn't killed tens of thousands. Now, we're not told why by the author here whether or not the reason for this is that it was a game of telephone gone bad and the word has gotten to these women that he's killed tens of thousands, or if this is someone being existential, a Taylor Swift of their time and saying, well, metaphorically speaking, he has killed tens of thousands, you see, because the Philistines, you see, represent a large army. It doesn't matter. But it makes him get into his feelings. I mean, he cannot celebrate. He cannot enjoy the moment. He feels the need to correct random people. And what is really true is that verse 9, it's really true in more ways than one, literally and figuratively. He keeps his eyes fixed on David. I've got to keep my eye on him. And this is, to some degree, right, keep your friends close and your enemies closer. But this is also negligence. This is negligence of what is probably even more true, which there's an opportunity here for Saul to turn over a new leaf and to say, hey, let's have some renewal. Let me finish well as a king. No, we're not going to do that. We're going to get into the business of scorecards. And how many followers and fans David has versus me, and begin to feel threatened. Rather than focus on the victory at hand and the fact that the border and security has happened and that people can flourish and even sing stupid songs about wrong information, he gets in his head and lets that obsess him. Which is the first point I want to just offer to you, and I don't have to probably defend this to a great deal. Is it possible in your life that some of the people that you compare yourself to, that it's taking your eyes off of the things that actually matter? That's taking you off a definition of success and flourishing that was put there by God or put there by the things you actually care about, and then turns your attention at the lunch table, in the break room, as it relates to college decisions, as it relates to where you live or what season of life you should be in right now, or the amount of square footage you have, where do I sit at? Where am I supposed to be, and versus where do I feel like I am? And here's the reality. Here's why it's a trap. Here's why Admiral Akbar was right. You can always find someone to make yourself feel better in that transaction. Right? This is why everyone likes to compare themselves to some of the notorious leaders of history. And then you will always be able to find someone that will, make yourself feel worse. I feel lesser than around this person. Why? Because I'm attaching some arbitrary metric to that conversation. And the tragedy here for Saul is that it takes his eyes off of the thing he's actually supposed to be doing and the real opportunity in front of him. And that is something you know. You know all too well if you've ridden in the car of a distracted driver, or you've been the distracted driver, or you've been the victim of a distracted driver, that nanoseconds of eyes turned to the left and the right can have really dangerous results. But we all know too well the temptation to be like, is that a deer over there? And what's going on over there? And what weird thing did I just observe in Baltimore? Was that a bull running down the street? Remember the bull? That was the thing that happened years ago, a random bull running through the west side, downtown. In your life today, assessing where you are, your definition of success. My suspicion is you feel stuck between a thing that you have been told by God or by people that you love and respect is true, and like some standards that might be creeping in to make you feel like, well, maybe it's not. And you feel stuck in a place that often, that we can see in Saul, like he's consumed by the reality of what David represents in his story. There's a great quote by Francis Chan. It's many years old at this point, but he once said, like, our greatest fear should not be of failure, but succeeding in things that don't really matter. And I just feel like that fits this conversation all too well. We can all find success finding some standards around us that don't actually matter a bit, but to the things that actually matter to us, to the direction that God is calling us to the direction of things that we feel like God has put in our life or the people God has put in our path. Are we focused on where that is taking our eyes, or are we focused on the things to the left and the right? And this begins to just eat Saul alive. Let's read on. The next day, an evil spirit from God came forcefully on Saul. He was prophesying in his house while David was playing the lyre as he usually did. Saul had a spear in his hand, and he hurled it, saying to himself, I'll pin David to the wall. But David eluded him twice. So there's a weight to leadership, for sure. He's the king. It's difficult to be the king. He's also, he's got to develop some practices that help him be the spiritual as well as physical presence that he needs to be as the king. And so there are a particular set of things that he's doing as king. This idea of prophesying is tied into one of many of those things. And if you know the story of David and Saul prior to this, one of the things you might notice is that at another point in the story, David's music helps him process his tension. David playing music actually helps to create some peace as he deals with the burden and pressure of that particular thing. But not anymore. We've got this idea of the evil spirit, and I'm not going to answer for you in a satisfactory way, whether we're talking about real manifestation or if we're dealing with like a dark night of the soul. But what we do know is that Saul seems to open a door to not being able to focus on a way and a pattern of dealing with things that brought release to his tension and connected him and hit reset on his relationship with God, but rather consumes him to the place of a deeper anxiety, to the point where he's throwing spears at an ally trying to eliminate the problem. We see in Saul a deeper anxiety. And this is the reality of comparison, is that every given Saturday night, someone's having a better time than you or a worse time than you. Where do you fit in? Every given week, someone's having a better financial week or a worse financial week than you. Where do you fit in? And there's places that you can go, and there's practices of the heart and the soul that help you process those anxieties, and there's places that you can go that will deepen them. Saul gives in to the things that will deepen his anxiety, that will create more spiral in him, right? To begin to resent someone that was once an ally and a helper in that particular pressure that he felt. So in your life, I just want to point out to you, right? It's very normal for us to feel comparison and feel the weight of where am I supposed to be, and am I there, and am I okay? But what do you do with that? Where do you take it? And what are the standards that you use? I mean, is there any place that you go that is like low-hanging fruit? You know it's not going to deliver it, but it amplifies the problem? And I'm old enough to remember when Steve Jobs tell us that like putting our life in our pocket was going to make things really simple for us. And in a lot of ways, it is. But in a lot of ways, maybe this isn't you, and maybe I'm the only one. In a lot of ways, it amplifies those anxieties. The reward for being immediately productive is that there are more people asking me to be productive. The reward for having access to lots of people, which is a really good thing, is that there's lots of people who have expectations of how I'm supposed to be responding to them, that everything that anyone is doing every Saturday night, I get a glimpse into. So do I feel good about that or do I not feel good about that? And so on and so forth. the reality is for us is it's so easy for us to find in this comparison world things that will deepen anxiety, particularly even in the places where for Saul it was once a help to have David around. We'll get into like the weirdness of allies becoming threats in just a minute, but I just want to highlight that to us and offer it to you. We have a weird job, as we think about how to process anxiety. In comparison, it relates to all the conveniences and the amenities that are available to us, and all the ways in which we have maybe an even harder job than the Sauls and the Davids had, because we can see literally what's happening all over the world. And where do we fit in, and where are we, and how are we going? And so even beginning to think about the devices in which we assess whether or not we're okay is something worthy of our consideration. If you're a parent, I would commend Jonathan Haidt's new book out to you, The Anxious Generation, which maybe speaks to the reality of the pressures that are in our pockets and how to think about those things. But I want to just continue that conversation to say, hey, comparison doesn't alleviate anxiety. It tells us that we will, because if I just feel good in comparison to this person, I'll be okay. What we often find is it makes the problem worse. 11 of chapter 18, Saul was afraid of David, so it makes it worse, because the Lord was with David but had departed from Saul. So he sent David away from him and gave David command over 1,000 men, and David led the troops in their campaigns. And everything he did, he had great success because the Lord was with him. Right? So what does he try to do here? He tries to do something that David will later try later on. Take your enemy, put him out in battle. To quote Ivan Drago, if he dies, he dies. Right? Like, if he dies, he dies, whatever. This person who's an ally, this person, David, who has been faithful, who has helped preserve the kingdom, is successful in battle, is someone he's trying to eliminate. Like, this person who is someone that could be helpful and maybe helping Saul finish well is now someone that has got to be pushed away and eradicated. Is it ever true in your life that some of the people that they're for you, but you don't think they're for you because of the comparison and the places you're casting your eyes? If you're a teenager, this is often true of your parents. If you're an adult, this can be true of coworkers or sometimes even your kids. Or intimate relationships. This person used to be for me, but now they seem to be against me, and so I'm going to build this wall and alienate them and do these weird things that, strangely, in the weirdness of this moment, make him more famous. It has the inverse problem that he thought it was going to deliver. And what it does is it takes allies and people that are for you and it makes them threats. And again, the sad story of Saul is that there are some people that were for him and tried to create flourishing for him that he alienates, distances himself from, lets a wedge drive between them, and ultimately leads further down a road of demise. Why? Because he's more focused on his place in the status quo than he is with what God wants to do long term in his story. Verse 15, when Saul saw how successful he was afraid of him. That's a phrase that we just keep hearing repeated. But all Israel and Judah loved David because he led them in their campaigns. So it has the inverse effect. Saul said to David, "Here's my older daughter Merab. I will give you her in marriage. Only serve me bravely and fight the battles of the Lord." For Saul said to himself, "I will not raise a hand against him. Let the Philistines do that." But David said to Saul, "Who am I, and what is my family or my clan in Israel, that I should become the king's son-in-law?" So when the time came for Merab, Saul's daughter, to be given to David, she was given in marriage to Adriel of Meholah. Now Saul's daughter Michal was in love with David, and when they told Saul about it, he was pleased. "I will give her to him," he thought, "so that she may be a snare to him, and so the hand of the Philistines may be against him." So Saul said to David, "Now you have a second opportunity to become my son-in-law." Let's pause for a minute. And let's just think for a second that we have the opportunity to confront Saul about his behavior and his actions and the foolishness. One of the defenses we could anticipate Saul giving It would be something to the degree of, I'm just trying to do right by my family. I'm just trying to like keep everything together. I'm just trying to hold things, in order, Now, so let's look at the fruit of that. His best, military mind, he's trying to have eliminated. That's a problem. His son is David's best friend. Talk about a father wound. Hey, remember that time you perpetually tried to kill my best buddy? And I have to be the in-between between you and my friend? That'll make Father's Day awkward. Right? He's not even mentioned in the passage, but that's like a whole other layer of it. Let's talk about his daughters for a minute. I know this arranged marriage thing is weird. But let's assume for a second, if we can come to this place, where the intentions of this are positive and intended to create flourishing for Merab and for Michal. Let's just say that for a second. Let's live in that space. What has he just committed himself to? Well, I'm hopeful that if I can arrange a marriage to Merab and David, David will get so distracted that he'll die. It's not easy to be a widow now. It wasn't easy to be a widow then. He would rather his daughter be widowed. We have a problem. Michal, who's into David, cool. This will be a snare for him. So it's not, but Daddy, I love him. Cool, let's go with that. No, that will manipulate my daughter's affection for David so that David might be trapped. Father of the year. Actually, read this passage. If you live in a weird land of comparison, you can feel really good about your parenting in this little section right here. If you feel like a bad parent today, you read this section. No, but here's what it does. Here's what it does. Every intimate relationship, he's not trusting God anymore. He's written off Samuel. David is no longer an ally, and his family, who we would probably say we're doing a lot of the things we do for, he's harming them. He's hurting them. He's comparison and this weird standard is eating away at the most intimate relationships he has. You want to destroy your marriage? You want to destroy, your kids? You want to destroy friendship? Attach arbitrary and not agreed upon standards to those relationships, and then get spun up all of the time when they're not coming true. That's what he does. And he's using the people he's called closest to care for to preserve his own lineage and name. I don't know where you might feel a sense of connection to that in your story, but that's really hard, and that's really a sad thing that we see in the passage, is that it alienates and isolates him from the people that are his friends, but more importantly, those most intimate relationships. It's a slow course of just full-on destruction. I don't know how, that's a mess. It's a mess of a situation, but that's where he goes. He actually sets up now with Michal this really weird, can you believe it's in the Bible story, where okay, David, you can win the hand of Michal if you bring me 300 foreskins. It's real, it's in there. And it's another place where David's yeah, okay, I'll do what you say. Won't ask a lot of questions. It's another attempt probably for David to be killed in the process, because acquiring such a thing is not something you find at random markets at the time. And so in such a way, David comes through again. It's David's imperial period. I mean, everything is working for David. But look at what happens again, one more time with Saul. Verse 28 and 29. When Saul realized that the Lord was with David and that his daughter Michal loved David, Saul became still more afraid of him, and he remained his enemy all the rest of the days. I know we've given a lot of narrative here, but did you catch the recurring vibe the recurring theme, all these attempts in comparison to eliminate his anxiety only led him further down a pit that he could not get out of. And this is the turning point in Saul's story. It gets tragic and sad from here. There is not like a great awakening in his life. There is a further distancing and alienation and a really, really sad end to his story. Proverbs 14:30 says, envy rots the bones. Envy rots the bones. A heart at peace gives life to the body, but envy rots the bones. And maybe some of us just feel that all too well. I don't want to just make this quick turn that's like, so turn your eyes to Jesus and everything's good. But I will say this about what Jesus is offering. Hebrews chapter 12 says, let us fix our eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith. Meaning this, when it comes to comparison, I think any time that we come into this room, we're going to be feeling some pressures of where we should be versus where we feel like we are, right? We're always going to feel this shoulder-to-shoulder tension of where am I supposed to be? Where am I? Am I okay? Am I all right? And this invitation for Jesus to be the author and perfecter of our faith is to process those pressures well in light of an empty cross and an empty tomb. Right? To say that, hey, the way of Saul is to let comparison consume us with standards that don't matter, but the way of Jesus helps us to see the things that actually do matter. To love God and to love people. That the way of Saul deepens our anxiety as we cry all the more, just to add up. But the way of Jesus says, hey, come to me, you who are weary and burdened, I will give you rest. My yoke is easy, my burden is light. Like you don't have to keep digging yourself into that deeper hole. The way of Saul says, hey, those people that are allies, they're coming for you. The way of Jesus says, hey, you are agents of reconciliation. You get to play a part in the story of restoration. The enemy of real connection is the way of Saul. The invitation of Jesus is that we can come together as sons and daughters with a real sense of mission. So as we come to the Lord's table, I just want to invite you to stop looking side to side and shoulder to shoulder and over your shoulder. And the invitation of communion is to say, hey, how do I look up? How do I look at broken body, shed blood, conquered empire, conquered sin and death as the source of my life? And as we come to the table, I want to ask us a couple questions that might prompt our minds and hearts to think about where we're actually trusting our identity. Here's 4 of them. Where are you exhausted from trying to keep up? What voices are forming the in you? If I was prettier, if I was smarter, if I was richer. What voices and where are those coming from? Where are you allowing what others have to keep you from enjoying what you have? Who would you secretly enjoy seeing fail? Might just be a window into some of the business God wants to do in our hearts and our lives and story this morning. As we come to the Lord's table, let's bring those things into the light so that we can bear one another's burdens and so that we can enjoy and walk in the freedom that the way of Jesus offers. Would you pray with me, and then we'll move to this time. God, as we come to these stations, it's a declaration of where hope is found, where identity and life gets us off the wheel of feeling this constant tension of never feeling like we're blank enough. And it's so much easier to say that that's a problem, and it's so much easier to declare it over someone else than to really walk in that freedom in our own story. So with your grace and your love, would you help us to receive the beauty of your invitation and to walk in the life you offer? In the name of Jesus we pray. Amen.